Hello, welcome to Miss IJ's Kids Inclusive Podcast. My name is IJ Popoola, and you can call me IJ. I will be your host. On this podcast, we'll be talking about the stigma individuals with special needs face on a day-to-day basis on the continent of Africa. We'll be bringing to you professionals in the disability field, sharing resources and information that can benefit any educator, parent, caregiver, and community with persons with disabilities. Join me on this journey in spreading hope and resilience as we advocate for inclusive education on the beautiful continent of Africa. Hello, my name is IJ Popoola. I'm here with the Miss IJ's Kids Inclusive Podcast, and we're going to be talking about students of color in special education. And I have a dear friend who is going to be joining us today. Her name is Miss Celine Wong, and let me tell you, she is absolutely a cherished friend of mine. We went to college together. I'll let her introduce herself. So if there are any road runners out there, they know us. But she is in education and has information about special education. So I'm really excited to have her on here. And she does other things too, which we'll talk about later on within the show. But Celine, thank you for being on the show. Welcome.
Thank you so much, IJ. I appreciate it. It's nice to see you.
Yeah.
I've been seeing you probably over 20 years, so it's like, instead of the internet, but it's definitely nice to see you and speak to you. Yay. And shout out to Rampo College, the Roadrunners. Shout out to them.
Yay. So could you tell us a little bit more about just yourself and what you do? I know you wear many hats, but I would like to, hear from you because I've seen what you do. I know of what you do, but for our listeners that are in Europe and in parts of Africa and also in the States, I really want you to tell us, just who is Celine Wong? Who is she? What does she do? And why is she just so dynamic?
Oh, well, that's a very wonderful introduction. But yes, my name is Selene Lewis Wong. I am from the state of New Jersey. So yeah, I'm a true Jersey girl. I'm a mom of 3. Wearing many hats is something that, I got from my own mother. She always wore many hats. She was multiple things. And I think she was showing me a good work ethic without even, teaching me. She was just showing me and I was just following in her footsteps. And so one of the many hats that I do have is that one, I am an educator. I've been in education for, I want to say 19 years.
This is right out of college, right? Or no? Was this right out of college?
Not really right out of college. I wasn't in education. I would work with families and children at the YMCA. And then 2 years after college, I started working in pre-K classrooms in East Orange, New Jersey.
Oh, East Orange.
And then from there, I was all over. I would say I was in all the urban cities that I love. East Orange, I was in the Bronx, I was in Newark, I was in Harlem, got out to Harlem with some heritages, and then ended up in my hometown in Jersey. And so I've been around in education and worn many hats within that field in special education.
Oh my gosh. So why education though? Like what made you get into education? I mean, I know there's probably some influence from YMCA, but.
Well, that and also my mother was an educator. My mother was a math teacher out of the Bronx for almost 30 years. And so I don't think she knew she was teaching me again about the work ethic of being a teacher, but I definitely followed in her footsteps as being in education, which brought me to special education. Was that I knew that children learn differently. And I learned that very early on, that there's not just one cookie cutter book that everybody has to learn out of. And there's multiple ways to learn one thing. There's multiple ways to cut an apple. There's multiple ways to cook a dish. And that was what it was, brought me kind of into special education. And also I have a cousin of mine that was back in those days, in the early 80s, they classified him as mental retardation. They call it now it's autism spectrum, but back then it was actually that's what it was classified. So I grew up with a cousin that was severely autistic, nonverbal, and so that kind of brought him heightened my interest in how the minds of children who are quote unquote disabled.
Yeah. See, that is so interesting because I like what you said about how there are different ways of learning, different styles of learning. And, somebody might say, or some of our viewers may say, well, why do you have to, have a topic talking about students of color in special education? And for me, I saw that as something very different. Like, I'm new to special education and you've been doing it for a while. But for me, the insight was, we had students in my class who were, their parents just came from Nigeria and their child was in the classroom, in a special education classroom. And there was such a difference in how the student was responding to me versus maybe responding to other students. And it just kind of made me start thinking about things very differently, because in Nigeria anyway, like, if you have a disability, like, there's such a stigma, surrounding it. So my other question for you is, do you feel like there is a disproportionate representation of students of color in special education?
Historically, yes, there was. Okay. So historically, a lot of our African American boys were pushed into special education because of just based on behavior, not cognitive ability, not on academics. The behavior actually caused the academics to fall, but a lot of them were kind of pushed into special education, making a rise in African American boys being in those classes, which they really did not need to. And a lot of them who are grown up now would tell you, I was in this class and I knew I shouldn't have been in this class. So then the behaviors kind of went elsewhere. Yeah. They weren't supposed to be in there. And so in my current position right now, I am in there to support the decrease of special education going into classrooms. And so we're not just basing it on behavior. We're trying to intervene and use intervention strategies to promote healthy education, and also, again, decreasing the amount of children going into special education if they do not need it. A lot of, especially here in America, and I want to just really centralize that and put that into New Jersey, or New York, New Jersey, this area over here. A lot of parents do not want their children going into special education because of that stigma. Yeah. And especially with the older population, they will say, I do not want my child to be labeled, because at one time, these children were being labeled, and it affected their ability to graduate and to be successful in school. Right. And also became a, I would say, get into the children's mind that I can't do it because I have this. And really, they were misdiagnosed and they should not have been there. So definitely was a problem here, but I do see the change in that. Right. And the reason why I do see the change in that, because in my current position, I'm there to support that change, right? And so I see the other sides of it. I see children who actually do need special education resources in classes, and I see children who do not. And because of the experience that I have, I'm able to distinguish which is which, and also be able to educate the teacher and administration on what this child needs. So I had that single position in my district, the only person in the district that was able to do that in the early childhood setting. Yeah. So you said diagnosis, and I wanted to ask you a question. Do you also think that a lot of Black and Brown, students of color are either misdiagnosed or diagnosed late of having a disability just within our culture? Like, is that something that is is high, or do they even get diagnosed? Is this something that's even accepted within the Black community now anyway? So I always go back to, and I hope your listeners are familiar with the Cosby Show. Theo Huxtable. I always go back to Theo. Let's just pause. We watched the Cosby Show back in Nigeria. Okay. There were a couple of things we did. No, it's good. I like that you say that. But our generation, we did. Now, when we came to the States, we didn't really understand the social, understanding. So I needed you and other friends to kind of figure it out. So I just wanted to say I get it. Oh, let me tell you something. Everybody go back and we look for the episode when Theo Huxtable found out that he had a learning disability. And he was, I believe he was in college, just like I was when I was at Renville College, found out that I was dyslexic, that we kind of just breezed through school. And he talked about how both his parents always said, you never did well in school. And, and kind of gave him the blame. And in fact, that he had an actual learning disability. And so that's years later that he went through the system and then struggled, and it was not diagnosed, whether because the parents were, in denial, or that teachers did not pick it up, but they knew there was a struggle. So that's also what my position is. When I did work in middle school, there were children who were classified or diagnosed with a disability very late on, and always had a track record of not doing very well in school. And it actually turned out that the child did have a learning disability. Who knows why it was not diagnosed in the prior years? Who knows what happened? But you can just imagine how a child would struggle during the early part of receiving education. Here we are in the 7th and 8th grade year. Over here is, 12, 13 years old. And all of a sudden, you have a learning disability. So imagine how that child felt. However, they were missing parts of learning that was supposed to be done years prior. Reading, phonics, sentence structure, writing ability, all those things that are taught in these primary years that they should have by a certain age, they do not. And so now what do we do with these children here? I have a quick answer to that. You educate them where they're at. You show them that they're 12 years old, they're going to read books for 12 years old, but they're going to modify, you're going to make sure you are providing instruction to their ability. It can still happen. We can't give up on those children. And also, let me add, you have to find a way to make sure they don't give up on themselves, which is probably harder than, it's harder to convince them they can do well than teaching them the skill. That teaching will is difficult. It is when it involves your mind and your own willpower. It's a lot of encouraging. That's why there's so many things that we have to do once these children are in a place where they feel like they want to give up. That's why we have mentoring programs. That's why we have supporters. That's why we have guidance counselors. That's why we have mental health officers that are there to provide those type of instructions for them.
I love when you say mentoring programs, because you're the founder of the Free Reads Project, and the Free Reads educational mentoring. It's a 501c3 program that supports, reading readiness, motivation, mentorship in the community. Is this probably, why you started, this, amazing organization for just students, starting them young, Yes. Well, I have multiple whys. That's okay. There's multiple reasons why I do everything I do, but this in particular is such a passion thing for me, because I love reading, right? I'm an avid reader. I really do enjoy reading. My sons do not. My sons do not love reading, and it breaks my heart because I'm constantly surrounded by books. I'm constantly going into bookstores and libraries and selecting things, and my sons are not interested at all. And so my thing is I wish I started them out early. Now, mind you, I'm an educator, right? And here I am slipping up with my own kids. And that's a problem. How you gonna slip up on your own? It be like that sometimes. Right. And it's oh gosh, my bad. So my thing is, when I founded this and I thought this idea, this concept of what if we get our children to love reading early? So just like there's multiple issues with our children, African-American boys not being successful in education, right? Not graduating from high school, not completing it. There are multiple solutions. So it's not just, again, here's a book, go read. No, because that's the case. Guess what? We won't have all these issues, right? No, we're guiding these children, providing with mentors that look like them, right? These mentors, they're not educators. They're regular guys. I have a retired engineer. I have a director of education. I have another retired supervisor. I have an attorney. Guess what we all have, and what I require as being part of this mission I have is that we all love to read. That's the only requirement. If we show these boys at an early age the love of reading, guess what? If they love to do it, they're going to want to do more. They're going to want to find out about these books. They're going to look past the cover and say, you know what? That title is dope. I'm gonna try to read that book.
right? I'm going to get into it. I'm going to learn how to converse and discuss literature. And that's what they have to do in school, because when they learn to converse and discuss it, they're also comprehending it. Boom, because all those comprehending skills and all those comprehension. I'm saying it wrong.
No.
Sorry, I speak fast, y'all.
You're good. No, I'm tracking though. I'm tracking.
Remember, I'm from Jersey, so this is how we talk.
I know. I'm tracking, but yeah, you're right though. No comprehension skills. I know.
But the comprehension skills that are needed in school, and also to be reading anything, are created, right? Just based on just talking about literature. So that's what we provide. We, we have wonderful boys and girls now in the Free Reads Project under the umbrella of Free Reads Educational Mentoring Program. Nice. That I love reading. And we also provide African American, or I'm going to say men and women of color who are being the authors of these books. So you have a book to a Black child being guided by a Black mentor, by a book that looks like them.
That's
representation
huge.
Definitely matters,
huge.
Right? Definitely matters.
That's huge. Wow. I could honestly, talk to you and digress, because I'm actually enjoying the interview. So I have to kind of stick to my questions, like, okay, IJ, focus. But I wanted to say something that it's not part of my interview questions, and I just feel it's the right time to interject. So when we talk about the African diaspora, right? And I'll use myself as an example. African came from Nigeria. This is back in the 1990s. Okay, it's not like now. Things are different. Right. Came, to the States or whatever. And, in the context of special education, and you're talking about, Black boys becoming Black men, not being diagnosed and things like that. A lot of times when we coming from Nigeria, of course, disability is not even discussed for the most part in the educational setting. And so we just we migrate to the state, we plunk ourselves into the American educational system that we know nothing about. Oh my goodness, we know nothing. So we got to figure out PTA. We got to figure out how to understand the accent. There's so many things going on, like for the immigrant, right? But I think what helps me is that I've been able to be that translator in between, like being in the States for a while and, really helping those African students in the special education class, because I would see that, again, they would just be under, disability category of emotional disturbance. And I'm like, is it really emotional disturbance, or you just maybe don't understand culture? And I just noticed that a lot of the kids were kind of like tagged under that category. And don't get me wrong, like I feel like with special education, like it really helps if that's what's needed. Right. But like you said, when we have people in these places to help, make sure that students don't get into special education if they don't need it, and then if they do need it, like it's properly assessed. You know what I mean? Again, representation matters. So I kind of find myself in that, like being the middle person, being able to translate, whether it's with cultures or what's happening, or even with the parents. Because we would find ourselves in IEP meetings and some of these African parents have no clue what they're talking about. And I'm like, wow, we have work to do. So, I'm really glad that you are in that space to be able to just help and to see and to know, because again, when kids who are, students of color don't feel motivated to go to college, because every single time they get a grade, it's a failing grade, and they're like, why am I even here? So I don't know. And you can chime in, with what I just said. It's just something I just observed with what you were saying and understood it to be a problem that is getting better, but it's really getting the right people in the right spaces to help the students.
And you just said it right there. Because you are, you came from Nigeria to the United States, you're able to put yourself in those places. So it's good that anyone sees you there. And that comes from any person that migrates to the United States from any country. We have a huge Arabic population in my town. And it's so helpful that we have people who speak Arabic in my school, help translate, and also do what you do, sit in on these meetings to help out with, culturally represent the people that are coming in. we have a lot of North African families who come, Morocco, Egypt, who come in speaking Arabic, and not understanding the language right there will have you just shut down. And so also we have people who have that experience, who speak the language and understand that this issue is not a special education issue. This child just needs support on language, right? That has to be clear. So same thing with children coming from Nigeria. They need support because culturally it's like probably a shock, right? And number two, the language as well. Although from my understanding, English is it's English in Nigeria.
Girl, but even with the English, we don't even understand. It's like you're saying R and we're like, even with my kids, they're like, that's not how you say that, Mom. I'm like, oh, yeah, it's broken.
But see, that's something that's good for us to learn about.
Yeah.
Side note, I have to visit Nigeria one day. Just side note. I need to go to Nigeria. I've read a book. It's like you want to go to
Nigeria?
Yes.
We can make that happen.
I would love to go to Nigeria, and I just want to experience. I'm an African American, born here born in the Bronx, but been reaching for the African culture and African heritage that is in my blood, but because of colonization, we don't know where we're exactly. I have to take an African ancestry
test.
Test. Anyway, that was so side notice.
That's okay. I do a lot of that, so it's right.
Yeah.
No, but you're right though. I like what you're saying about representation and just it may not necessarily be a special education issue, maybe just a language support thing.
Yeah, language support, and also we need is diversity support too. Yeah. We need to, to help with back in the day is probably to find yourself in American culture. I think it's not that. I think that, remember, this country is a country of immigrants, right? This whole country, everyone came from somewhere.
Yes.
Even, African American enslaved people that came across as well. So I think it's more like making yourself be known in this country and not really saying taken away from your heritage. It's just bring your heritage here, There's even some words that they say when using the word immigrant, because people have kind of used that word in negative connotation, which is not good. Some people have done that, which you should not do, because the people that come in this country made this country, and so that's something that's good that we also need to acknowledge. Even in education, a lot of people who are in administration, they were not born in this country. They were raised here, not like you, IJ. You weren't born in the United States, but however, I know you're not here now. I don't know where you are, but in the United States, you worked here, you settled here, you taught here. So it's good that, like I said, this representation really does matter. It does matter.
Speaking of representation, I want to go back a little bit to the genesis of special education. So we can't talk about special education without talking about the civil rights movement. That's another thing. Going to school, I was like, really? And I, would always ask questions about that. But there will be no IDEA without it. So as an educator, do you think this is a very important aspect of SPED that most special educators know, but I don't think it's not a widespread knowledge.
Right.
Yeah.
Right.
So
what the civil rights movement really did is open the doors for every other movement out there. Yeah. Okay. It goes beyond Dr. Martin Luther King. It started way beyond then. He's just well known, but it started way beyond then. I think even beyond even what the what we are taught in school. We have to go deeper, how our freedoms were always, demanded by us. However, we were shut down by either, some of us were murdered in trying to reach those civil rights. And we have to really understand and unpack that word civil. We just asked for rights that, hey, we want to get a drink from his water fountain and not get hit in the club. You know what I'm saying? We just want to walk down the street and not be able to get spat on. So we were asking for rights that should have already been given to us. We're just asking for everybody to be civil, to act right, basically. That's what we wanted them to do. Not that whole movement is now, as I said, it's like everybody get right movement. Y'all gotta get right, right? That's what that movement that movement really is. And that also with people coming from immigrants coming from Japan, China, Asian countries, all those people. We the African Americans, the civil rights movement opened doors for all that. The LGBTQ community, that as well, civil rights. Under even people with like of course the Disabilities Act, of course, people who are hearing impaired, people who are not the what to say the hearing impaired community, the I don't want to say this, but the sight impaired, the blind, that. Hard of hearing and blind. Right. I'm trying to do appropriate words here, but I'm like mumbling. But you get what I mean, right? It opened the door for everyone who were the quote unquote disfranchised. Yes. Right. And that's what it did. And now we're still using that same model of civil rights now, because as you see, it unpacked a whole bunch of stuff. American culture, colonized culture, I want to say, I want to be clear with that, kind of like, put everything in a box. And then now we're all coming out of the box like, no. We're here, we need this. We should get these rights because they got those rights. We all need these rights. Yeah. That's what the civil rights movement did.
Yeah. No, it's amazing. I mean, when we talk about, I think it's the Brown versus Board of Education, that helped with segregation. It was really all under that, like you said, instead of referring to people, who may have mental health challenges, instead of saying, they're retards or whatever, like you said, you use different words, and they're able to learn alongside, students who don't have disabilities. So I just think it's such an important part of, the movement, if you want to call it that. Shouldn't be just highlighted in February, but like all year round, that, people, have those basic rights to be treated like a human being. And I think for me, again, coming from Nigeria, I really didn't know all these things, but, because I'm going to school and I'm doing my dissertation and stuff like that. And I think you're kind of like doing the same thing too. I'm not sure, but it's important because, when we talk about like the UNESCO and the UN, when we talk about disability on an international level, a lot of that, it's still because of the civil rights movement, and that's part of what my dissertation is trying to do, is like make that connection, like, hey, what these guys did, back in the 60s is huge. I mean, I think it's so huge, when you look at it from a global standpoint, that it just needs to always be at the forefront and just amplified in my opinion. But so my other question is, with, again, disability and I want to bring it back to, parts of Africa. The reason why I want this podcast to be a little bit more diverse than just what's going on the continent is that, hey, someone who has, has visual impairment or is hearing impaired or has, Down syndrome, is the same challenges we're facing in like Nigeria or like parts of Africa, right? And when you think of developed nations versus those that are developing, even though I think that Nigeria can be a developed nation, it's just bad implementation of resources, but that's a whole different podcast on its own. I'm bringing it back, to Nigeria in the sense of a disability is a disability. And I know that for us, a lot of families and even educators who may not have the education or the resources or the support, there's a huge stigma attached to having a disability.
Oh, absolutely.
Here, at least, it's a little better. You can get a job, it's a law. Even though it's a law in Nigeria, it's just not enforced really the way it should be. But bringing it back to like brown and Black communities in, let's say, developed, countries like America, do you still think that there is a stigma attached to having a disability or even having maybe mental health issues, in the communities over here?
Well, they're trying to destigmatize all that. They're trying to do that. I think it is where we are now is a lot better.
A lot better.
Like you said, things are now, it's, there's legality reasons now why you can't fire someone because of a disability or cannot hire someone because of a disability. If you fill out any application, it says, do you have, it says on the application about disability, but, also it says that it's an equal opportunity employer.
Yes.
Equal opportunity employer. So under that equal opportunity employer, you can go in there with a disability. You can go in there with sexual orientation preference. You can go in there with race. Doesn't matter what race you are. You can go under that. So we do have that to protect us. Doesn't always protect us. There are ways that people try to sneak things, but we have that law in place here. I don't know how it is. And you said there was laws in place in Nigeria too.
There are, it's just not implemented.
It's not implemented. Well, that's people. This is all new here, right? We're talking about, let's say 1970, right? Or 1974, or that's fairly new. We're talking about 50 years now of putting these things in place. Prior to that, there's a whole generation of people who are not able to do those things, right? Because of the disabilities. There are people in the South, I'm not saying the South, but another generation who never learned ASL, who never learned the American Sign Language, who were deaf people. And so it's like, oh my gosh, they're still alive. They're still here. They're older population. But like I said, this is all new. 50 years of implementing this into law, putting this into law, putting into legislation, using all the politicians to make sure this stuff is implemented. People who are physically handicapped, right? That law is just only 50 years ago. That's it. That there's ramps to go into stores. There's ramps that go into the malls, and you have a parking space. All that is just in the last 50 years. So,
that's perspective.
Right. It's not, so it just, when you say it's not implemented, and I don't know when those laws were implemented in Nigeria, it takes a long time. I mean, looking at the civil rights with the quote unquote Jim Crow. Let me tell you, people were still doing those things way after Lyndon B. Johnson signed that.
Yeah. That's true,
one of the
though.
presidents. So
that's true.
We have to, like, even with slavery in this country too. It took 2 years for people to tell people in Texas, like, hey, we're free. We're free. That's what whole Juneteenth was about.
Yeah.
So it takes a long time for any of these things to work. That's one thing. Perspective. You know what I'm saying? So in here, like we're not 50 years old, so we kind of grew up in these new freedoms. The freedoms that we have here now are just brand new. We need to realize that too. Yeah. My parents didn't have these freedoms.
Yeah, that's true though.
We did not have these. Daddy didn't have these freedoms. My daddy. He was born and raised in Montgomery, Alabama. So when he was my age, these things were just being thought about. Like, maybe you know what? Maybe we should allow people of color to do stuff. Yeah. When he was around my age, right? So we got to think about that too. These are all brand new things.
That puts a lot of in perspective with how, we always try to look at, we talk about what's not so good, but we also talk about how, the things that are working and that there is special education. Most public schools in Nigeria don't have a special education teacher. And, I know that I kind of dragged you into this group on Facebook, and I'm like, I'm going to go around, I'm going to find all the Black special education teachers, and we're going to go back. That's the ticket, in going back to Nigeria. My plan is, we have a problem, let's find a solution. You don't have special education classes because you don't have special education teachers. Okay, well, let's train some people coming out of school in special education, and let's do it one school at a time. That's a simple problem. We're going to find a simple solution because it absolutely makes no sense that some of these kids can't even enroll into school because we don't have the training. And again, there's so many groups. I mean, my heart is always so moved with how many nonprofits are out there that are just doing what they can, and only because they're angel donors and just people that are given from the bottom of their hearts just to help. But all that shouldn't be coming from people. That stuff needs to be coming from the government. But another podcast for another day. Anyway,
right. Well, like you said, one school at a time.
Yeah.
One street at a time, one home at a time, one child at a time.
And that's
so it takes one person to start a movement and to get some friends and pals and comrades to move with you. You know.
Well, please come with me because it looks like, because again, I mean, and this is all sidebar, like I went to school for acting at Ramapo. So education is really new. And the only reason why I got into education, you're going to laugh at this. I did a commercial back in Oklahoma, and the commercial was, they got a grant from the government, like a $10 million grant to help people get back into school. And they're like, hey, you're a principal, like actor, we'll sponsor your school. I'm like, okay. And that's how I just did that with subbing, and I got into special education because they needed somebody in there. And I feel ashamed at times to talk about it. I never knew about a special education classroom since 20 something years being in the States. I was amazed. And then it turned out that some of the students that were in my class, they used to, their families used to come to our African restaurant back in Oklahoma.
Yes.
I was like, what? Okay, all right, okay, pack up the restaurant. We're going into education. Like I was so moved by it. And the kids, I'm telling you, they were amazing. Like, I always think about like my first sped class, and I'm just like, they taught me so much about love and acceptance, and that we are human and people too. Just because we don't do things like you do doesn't mean that we can't do it with assistance and modification and accommodations and all that. So I don't know, I just kind of see it as my life calling. That is
and when you find that passion, you just go deep in it. But you are like me in the sense that we have multiple passions, right? Multiple passions, like wearing a lot of hats, and that's what we do, and that's fine with that, and one of these, the podcast that you have, you're trying to find a solution or trying to find resources to provide you with, the support, Nigerian children in special education. That's a big deal when you see the neglect or the not being there, and of all these years. And so that's a great mission to have, and I applaud you and commend you on that.
Well, I'm just really grateful that, I have, people like you who, and again, you have a radio show. I forgot to put that out there. And it'll be like in a little, bio blog, but I've admired you from afar secretly.
Aww.
And it's such a pleasure to have you here. But I'm going to end with our 2 questions, and I think that'll be it. So my second to last question is self-advocacy, right?
Yes.
Why is teaching self-advocacy to students of color extremely important, especially today, students of color who have a disability, teaching them to be self-advocates for themselves?
Right. Well, for some children, you have to speak that to them, and just also tell them, acknowledge that you are an important person and you should get everything that you deserve. You have to speak that into children. You know where that starts? That starts at home. You got to speak that into your children. And, my son is dyslexic, just like I'm dyslexic as well. And for him, it was very difficult to kind of find his groove. None of the teacher would find his groove. Okay. Nobody was helping him find his groove. His mama found it in him and said, listen, when we go into these IEP meetings, these meetings that, I have to sit in front of all these folk, you sit in there right there too. I want you to listen in and see what these teachers are saying about you. And I want you to speak up for yourself. Is this helpful? Using the voice typing on Google Docs, is that helpful? Because if not, we got to find something else, because you're still going to do this paper, right? You're still going to do this research paper. I pray to God that he goes into college. I'm going to encourage him. He has 2 more years. Yeah. And so it's like, I'm going to encourage him as much as possible so he can go into college and say, hey, I'm dyslexic. I need a voice to speech to text.
Nice.
He needs to do that. If not, no one is going to do it for you. So you have to self-advocate for yourself. But you got to teach that, because if not, children will sit there and people just pass them by. No one's coming to rescue you. And that's like life. right?
Yeah.
So you have to be able to, going back to that will, right? Say to yourself, I have this issue. I need this. You could be a lawyer, doctor, engineer, it could be anything you want. But you have to speak up for yourself, right?
Yeah.
And so teaching that as you're young, and also being a parent, a parent is basically implementing that in their brains every single day. Like it's like I use the Lion King as a metaphor. Oh my God. Rafiki goes, you don't even know who you are.
I love it.
Teach them who you are. Teach them who they are.
Oh my goodness gracious. I love that. Because it's important, right? And and even for I would say, like, I'll speak from my culture, like, you know, parents who are coming from Nigeria or whatever, or any other country that is different from where you're going to, if it's a developed country, like, they have to learn how to be, because I saw a lot of parents just walk out of IEP meetings crying because they didn't understand, you know. And I was so grateful that we had educators that were empathetic towards that, you know. And so it's like the parents need support as well, you know, as they're supporting their kids, because some of those IEP meetings can be tough.
Yes, absolutely. It could be tough and it could be stressful. And and I was one of those parents. Me being an educator was still one of those parents, because you read all these things, you're like, oh my gosh, my son can't understand what? Like, you still feel that way. And there's also an amount of guilt that you have, like, oh my gosh, I should have done this, I should have done this, I should have done this.
Exactly.
You always have that. So, you know, it's good to have people who are empathetic with you at these meetings. It's good to even go in with an advocate too. You know, someone who knows special education law and special education practice, to go in with you and sit in on these meetings to make sure that you fully understand what you are signing off to. Because here in the United States, everyone, your child just can't go into special education. You have to sign off on that. There are parental rights with this, you know, so that's why it's important you have an advocate, if you don't know much about it, to lead you to the right practice. But there are children who actually need special education, so we want to get them there. They don't think like, oh, this is not going to be good for my kid. You never know. So, you know, it's practice here in the United States that, you know, there are parental rights.
Yeah. Wow. I have totally enjoyed this interview, Celine. I am so glad that we were able to connect. Even though with other circumstances, it's still absolutely beautiful to me. And I'm just so proud with everything that you're doing. And I know that, you know, with this Black educators, you know, initiative that I'm doing that's global. I'm really hoping that it'll be something. In fact, my plan is to, you know, sponsor, like, maybe, I don't know how many SPED teachers that, again, representation, because a lot of the students in these rural areas may not have seen white people, but, you know, they see Black people's, like, that can help, like, where I'm, you know, trying to, you know, tap in on that. It's very important.
But they know we're American or not from Nigeria. I know for me, when I was in Senegal, they knew I wasn't American. They knew I wasn't Senegalese.
Yes, you know? Yes, they do, you know, but it is.
Like, hi guys.
Oh yeah, definitely. They can smell an American from a mile away.
Yes.
They can do that. But yeah, I just, you know, and I was also seeing it as a great way to really connect the diaspora, you know, because there are not a lot of Black special educators. It's a whole different podcast.
Right.
Very grateful for you, Celine. I really
I'm grateful for this conversation. Thank you for inviting me. I enjoyed this conversation.
Thank you.
I love it.
Thank you so much.
Thanks for listening to Miss IJ's Kids Inclusive Podcast this week. If you haven't subscribed yet, please do so on our website at www.ijpopoola.com. Or if you want to write to us about topics you would love to hear covered on the show, the email address is popoloijelma@gmail.com, one word. And if you'd like to follow us on our social media pages, it's at Miss IJ's Kids. I am IJ Popoola, and you've listened to Miss IJ's Kids Inclusive Podcast.